A new business innovation in corporations is just like a venture. Managing it as an operational business or corporate R&D project is a recipe for failure. One common pitfall is applying traditional key performance indicators, KPIs, too early, as it stifles risk taking and prevents innovation. Instead, our guests argue in favor of using non financial KPIs that indicate progress at early stages of any new business validation. These serve as a compass that helps the innovation team, stakeholders, and management navigate their way to success. Well defined progress and success metrics, when combined with the right understanding on how to build a $100 million business, enable business owners to evaluate the actual performance of their business in almost real time. At Mann+Hummel, today's guest used a hunter strategy concept to design growth validation process for their digital ventures focusing on exploration type businesses. Now, before I introduce those guests, I want to thank our sponsor of the Corporate Explorer series, Wazoku. Wazoku helps large organizations create effective, sustainable innovation ecosystems that accelerate efficiency gains and new value growth. It does this through intelligent enterprise software that connects and harnesses the power of employees, suppliers, startups, universities, and the unique Wazoku crowd of over 700,000 plus global problem solvers. And Wazoku call that connected collective intelligence. And you can find Wazoku at www.wazoku.com. Now, to today's guests and the latest episode of the Corporate Explorer series called Validation, Managing the Journey from Concept to Scale. We are joined by two corporate explorers who have done just that. Ellie Amirnasr and Charles Vaillant, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
It's great to have you on the show, guys. We have so much to talk about, and you have so much wisdom and scar tissue and arrows in your back to share with our audience because you've been through this many times. And I was so intrigued to hear about your story because one of the things we talk about in innovation all the time is how metrics are broken. But we also don't realize that metrics can be broken even for the innovation process because the innovation process changes depending on the size of the opportunity you're going after, whether it's B2C, B2B, what life cycle stage that business is at, that opportunity is at, et cetera, et cetera. So there's loads to get through today. But I thought we'd start up first by explaining who Mann+Hummel is, who you guys are in that business.
My name is Charles Vaillant. I'm the CTO and also CDO of Mann+Hummel, so in charge of the technology arm and the digitalization arm of the corporation. We are a privately owned German-based corporation. We have been in business for 80 plus years, and our focus is to separate the useful from the harmful. In other terms, we do filtration. That's what we do. Any type of filters. Of course, filters are everywhere in your daily life, from the food that you eat, the air that you breathe, the water that you use for your laundry or washing yourself, all the way to the way you go to work with your car. We do about 32 filter every second, 24/7, and globally located, 80 locations globally. One of those so-called hidden champion of Germany.
I'm Ellie Amirnasr, as you mentioned, and I've been with Mann+Hummel for a little bit over 11 years now. I studied material science and joined Mann+Hummel as innovation project manager. At first, I was more into the innovation process for core business development. And then in 2018, I started the journey of transformational business development and digitalization. And since then, I've been dealing with corporate metrics for startups and startups behavior for corporate. And currently I'm managing the digital ventures and digital business for Mann+Hummel.
Let's get stuck in. We have so much to get through. Many of our audience are corporate explorers, they're change makers, transformation artists inside organizations, and also startup founders. And we know that traditional metrics and measurement are the bane of so many of our listeners. Let's share why that is from your experience before we get into solutions. And I'd love you then, Ellie, to take us through the hunter strategy. But maybe, Charles, we'll start with you. And what's so broken about these metrics?
Naturally, when you do innovation, you are investing quite a bit of resources, which is manpower, but also financial investments that at the firm level, you're competing against other sorts of investment. And your top management, your CFO want to make sure that those investments are put at good use. So naturally, the way you run your core business is very efficient. You know how to measure it. You measure your ROI on project. You measure your return on investment, your time to market, and you're able to do this in a very efficient way. We typically tend to call this the exploitation type of business. The market risk is very limited or inexistent. You want to enter a new market with a product, so you have to work on the technology. So in my view, it's pretty straight line. Right? You know what the objective is, you know where you want to go, and then you go there. And the typical metrics that people use are okay for that. But then when you go into more breakthrough innovation, transformation B, depending on how you call it, right? It's a new market, new business model, those type of exploratory type of innovation, it becomes a bit more nebulous. Why? Because the market may not exist, the technology doesn't exist, and this is not straight line. In fact, we know, and we have experience that you never end up with what you start with, right? The hypothesis of today is not what you will deliver. And as you go through the journey, you progress, you learn, you pivot, you change direction, you stop. And once in a while you succeed. So I like to say that innovation in general, in my view, cannot be efficient. Okay. So that is a big statement, radical. But then I quickly enhance the sentence, says, but it needs to be effective, right? So our job as innovators, our corporate explorers, are really for us to find the most way to be effective. And we know we have to design solutions and process where waste is okay and learnings are okay. And for those, the metrics of today, they just don't work. So you need to find another metric, because having no metrics at all is also not an option. And the reason is because you create a huge amount of frustration. The team is anxious because they know the top management can pull the plug at any second for any reason. And there is no transparency and visibility when they can do this. Management is frustrated because they feel the team is running in circle and not delivering any results, and they're wasting money. So you create that situation where it's unhealthy. So we are a German company, so we like metrics. So we're like, okay, how can we break this paradigm? How do we design a system and metrics that enable us provide that transparency, that visibility, without falling into the trap to measuring the wrong thing?
And Charles, before we come to Ellie and talk about punter strategy, I just wanted to ask about the reporting structure, because obviously your executive leadership team understand the metrics need to be different. But one of the big challenges in so many organizations I talk to and many guests that we have on the show is that perhaps the corporate explorer is reporting to a CFO. And the CFO, by their very nature, is not going to agree to the fact that we're inefficient here. We're gonna create a lot of waste, and they're going to be going, "Oh my God," and panicking all the time. And how to deal with that? So you obviously have had to evolve over time to get that to be the mindset of the organization. But there has to be education of that for the senior leadership team, particularly if it was a stable exploitation business in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the natural evolution. I mean, the senior management and the mandate of the CEO, the CFO, the C-suite, they need to understand that. And they all smart folks, and they all went to business school, and they studied strategy and lead startup and reading the book. So typically they are well informed about it. In fact, this whole concept of exploration exploitation really was started with our CEO bring that concept and some discussion that he has had. So I personally reported the CFO of Mann+Hummel, and she understands that. In fact, she has a very good concept of innovation herself. We tried this. So we have good dialogue. Now, for sure, globally, we have to deliver our numbers and we have to be profitable and so on. The world is changing at such a rapid pace. Transformation, being digital, being AI, being everything around us is changing at such a rapid pace that the C-suite cannot ignore those type of changes and direction. And therefore they rely and they are requested and required by their shareholders to innovate beyond the core, because innovating only on the core will not guarantee success. In fact, it will probably guarantee long-term failure of the corporation.
Amen. I'm your brother with all of this. So Ellie, let's talk about your approach and using the hunter strategy. And I'm going to share on the screen, and I'm not going to give anything away, the different animals and how you approach those different animals. Over to you to take us through this.
Sure, absolutely. Before I start to explain the journey of hunting in a corporate environment, I just want to second what Charles said. Innovation by nature is inefficient. For corporate standardized process, I would say, right? Because for a good reason, corporate is coming and standardizing their processes and everything. And innovation requires faster iteration and understanding of what the learnings are, and then building on top of that. And there's not much standardization that you can actually put on that because you're changing direction quite often. Moving to the hunter strategy, it's exactly what it is. If you're looking at an animal, how it's going to move, how fast it's moving and everything, this is changing your strategy as well. So imagine 5 different type and size of animal. Imagine a fly, a mouse, a rabbit, a deer, and an elephant. So the size of each animal represents the size of a deal that you can get out of a business. So fly, for example, represents what I would say a consumer market, for example. So it means that the deal size is around $10 or less. The mouse is representing the size of one deal of $100 or less. The rabbit is around $1,000 or less for one deal. And then the deer is 10,000 and goes up to elephant, and you can go to dinosaurs and any size of the animals that you want to actually put in there. This concept coming from Christoph Vaillant says, if you want to build $100 million business in this world, and you're going after fly type businesses, which is $10 or less, you require to acquire about 10 million customers to actually get to that point. And if you're going to an elephant size customer, it's around 1,000 customers and you have to acquire to get to $100 million business. Okay. What does that tell us? When you have somebody that has to make a decision for a $10 or less, they usually make that decision in an hour or less than that. It's either a click of a button or something like this. So your business type and the decision making process is completely different. When somebody has to make a choice for spending $100,000, they usually take their time. They do more evaluation. So the sales cycles are different for these type of animals and these type of businesses. Why am I explaining it like this? Because at Mann+Hummel, we actually work backward. We look at our targets where we want to be in 10 years, 20 years, and then we reverse engineer that business process and come back for KPIs in today's world. Okay. So it means that if I'm trying to reach to $100 million business for an elephant type business, it means that I have to acquire 1,000 customers. My sales cycles most probably is between 3 to 6 months. So how many customers in what period of time do I have to acquire? And we start working backward ourselves. Like, what is the pipeline that we have to build? How long does it take to actually get from the time that we launch this product to acquire the first customer? What is the growth curve and all of these things? And then we develop the KPIs based on that. Instead of jumping in and putting like, okay, so we want to get $100 million in 10 years. We divide it by, 10. We create this hockey stick and we're good to go. And then we constantly get frustrated by not hitting our sales target. If you ask Charles, he will tell you that we constantly, at the beginning, we used to set targets and not reach it, and set targets and not reach it. If you show that in the CFO, of course they get frustrated because they plan for every single dollar that you're planning to bring in. And if you're not bringing that, it doesn't make sense. For investors, it's very important to show the return on their investment. Not necessarily right at the beginning, the return on investment is in dollar that you can bring in. It's actually about the customer base that you're building, the outreach that you will have, the market that you're creating. And we started putting KPIs on those at the beginning, especially when we were doing exploration. And if you cannot hit those targets, you definitely cannot get sales. If you cannot even get one customer to talk to you, if you can't even create a proposal or quote for 10 customers of the size that you're talking about, you will never actually get to making any sales anyway. So, and then we communicate these with the stakeholders and the management so they will see the progress. And it's actually, I would say, a business practice to go through these efforts that you have to actually deliver or close a deal. And that's basically the concept of Hunter strategy. Now, if you want to do Fly, you're not going to go and sit with the customer and talk to them. Most probably it's an e-commerce platform. The metrics for e-commerce platform, the way that customers hear from you is completely different. And then we change our approach for each business based on that, which sometimes it might not be the same practice that today, for example, Mann+Hummel is using. So we avoid the standardization of the process that they have and try to test these ideas with this strategy.
I wanted to lean into something you said that is so important, and it links to what Charles said earlier on, is that you have created some type of relationship with a CFO or whoever you're reporting the metrics to. And I've been guilty of this, miscommunicate or just go finger in the air and guess what those metrics will be, not being sure of when you'll be able to deliver those. But in the past, and I'm sure some people still do this, we blame them. We kind of goes, those dinosaurs, they don't understand, etc. But when you point the finger, there's three pointing back to yourself, and you got to realize that, well, I didn't even do my homework here to understand what are the right metrics, how, to your point, different businesses in different business models all have different metrics, and then to be able to capture those and then use them the next time. That's not something that is even interesting to many, many people who work in innovation, because it's not the fuzzy ideation stage. And what I'm so struck by Mann+Hummel, is that you guys have created a process, but even that process evolves consistently and constantly. And I'd love you to tell us a little bit about that, because you use your processes to actually innovate your processes.
Yeah, we do. You can't stand still, otherwise it doesn't work. Because the last thing you want is to have a very academic process. And I think everyone, probably of the listeners, have in that situation. You come with someone that's really rolled their eyes like, yeah, but this is very academic. This is not the real world. We have to make money here, right? So it's okay to have those type of hypothesis and concept, but they have to work for you. And what works for us probably doesn't work for other firms, right? So you have to adapt. I think any type of framework that you're using, being the Horizon 1, 2, 3, the dual transformation, the Vaillant framework, it doesn't matter. All of those, in my view, they need to be adapted. And the way you measure this needs to be adapted as well. What we have done over the last 12 months, so you understand now that, especially for exploratory type of business, we are actually forcing up, we do not measure financial metrics. We measure progress metric, growth metric. So we're looking at customers are acquired, systems we're delivering, the usage of the platform. So depending on the type of business, but we disconnect the numbers. Now we track sales because we also track cash flow, and we try to replicate for our corporate startup the same type of focus on the cash. So we look at free cash flow on a monthly basis, and then the owner of that business or that team needs to understand how much he's getting from his customer, how much he's investing. But that's really from a pure cash flow perspective, making sure that they understand that cash is limited and cash is precious. But regarding the patience that we want to put on the project, and to avoid the discussion about how many zombies do we have in the organization, this is where we have all this progress matrix, right? So, and here over the last years, we thought about a method where we look at 5 dimensions: the product market fit, which is very important at the very early stage of initiation. Then we look at scalability of the business. We look at profitability of the business, but much later on. So depending on later stage of the growth, we look at unfair advantage. Are we leveraging the capability of the organization to give us this unfair advantage, and the market size? Now, are we attacking the point that Ellie was mentioning with the animals? It's nice if the sublet business is 10,000 for every acquired business, but if there's only 5 in the world, so the question is, do you even want to get this? So let's make sure we don't end up with a niche business. And the reason why this is so important, that the target addressable market is significant, is because the chance of success are very low. And we have to be honest. And it's go back to my adaptation, is I need to be effective. So I got to make sure that if I place my bet into that quadrant, I need to do the best job possible. But if I get there, it needs to provide huge reward. Because otherwise, when you make the numbers game, it just doesn't happen. So you talked about the evolution. So having this new type of metric that we are just currently deploying, and it's really helped the team to really speak the language. People speak about product market fit, and they understand, okay, next 6-month cycle, we will focus on demonstrating and validating that our product has a good product market fit. In the past, we used to ask the question, do you have a product market fit? Yes, we do. We have 1 paying customer. Now we're asking, okay, show me evidence that you have product market fit. Show me evidence that you can scale up. So I appreciate a discussion, but I don't take it for face value. You need to demonstrate with data that you have a product market fit, that you're scalable, that you're profitable, and that you leverage the company capability. So it's a little bit more in depth and get in the game type of things, a little bit more difficult about the discussion, and provide that transparency between the team and the management. Because at the end, the management, in my view, the management does not have the capability to run your business, right? So what got you here won't get you there. We know how to run our core business, but as a CTO, I don't know how to code. I don't know how to design sort of the chemistry that we're working on. So I have to trust that my associates are competent. What I can do is provide the framework and time box, a space for them to innovate, for them to show progress. But we are very clear on that time frame and what are the objective to achieve. And then we get at the end of the cycle, and we can look at the data and say, are we happy with the progress, or are we not happy? Do we give it another chance, or we don't?
We've talked about managing different businesses, how to hunt businesses like Ellie talked about. But one of the things that consistently comes up is resource allocation. The way I think about what you're doing is you have many businesses like plates on sticks, and you have to give them different energy, different resources over time, different money allocation, people allocation, energy allocation, time allocation of leadership energy. But one of the things that I see a lot is businesses, mature businesses, do not invest R&D money, like proper R&D money, versus incremental or just business as usual improvements that they label as innovation, that are so far away from R&D. So even when they get government grants, this happens where that money doesn't go to where it really needs to do. To your point, Charles, what got you here won't get you there in the future. How do you manage that resource allocation to be able to protect funds to go, that's proper R&D money, that's not to be used for incremental innovation or business as usual improvements?
We like the analogy now, and Ellie told us about the hunter strategy. So if you think about going hunting, how do you have the best equipment, right? If you go hunting with a slingshot and 3-star in your pocket, it's going to be hard to feed yourself or the family. So you need to have enough resources. If you think about the universal metric corporations are using to look at the capability of an organization to innovate, is a very simple one. It's R&D investment as a percent of net sales or sales. So this is what is reported. The most innovative company, Tesla, is spending over 50% of their sales on R&D. And then you can go through Google, you can look at all this company. But if you think about this R&D budget needs to be now distributed between different types of R&D work. And corporation like Mann+Hummel, we are an industrial company in the B2B space. We spend and we use a lot of that financial resources into incremental tasks. So some people call that incremental innovation. In fact, at Mann+Hummel, we don't call that innovation. We call that R&D work. So what are those? Those are material cost reductions to get, a little bit more gross margin on your product. It's the change of label on the product. You're selling a product to a customer, you make a private label tomorrow, it's the same product, the box needs to be different, and so on. You need an engineer to create a new part number, loading the systems. It's very incremental, help you to survive, very important to your business. It's not going to help you break tomorrow on the map, right? So then if you look at the percent of sales, R&D as a percent of sales, and you start to bucket what you're doing. So you look at incremental spend, you can look at core innovation, true innovation. What are those? Those are innovation that drive USP, differentiation, brand equity, where you can go into the market and get market share because your product is so much better than whatever exists today, either in your core business or maybe some adjacent business that you have. And then you have the breakthrough or breakaway type of business, which is the revolutionary type of things that has a high chance of return, but also a low chance of success. So you need to look at this because today, and this is the way we look at it, we spend the majority of R&D spend on this incremental task. Therefore, we are indirectly starving the true investment. Our CEO, I was with him last week, and he was saying, if we would have a better way to use that investment, there's so many more innovation we can bring to market, right? We not the ideas and the potential project is not the problem. The problem is how do we finance all this while keeping the incremental business as well. So now you think about digital transformation that we are all talking about, right? AI generated designs. How do you quote a product without having a human behind the keyboard and so on? So you can now take this majority of your R&D spend and through transformation, internal transformation, how do you drive better processes that you can really take the majority of the human tasks out? So that process still needs to take place. Designing a new label, changing the color of a product, but that is done basically almost automated. You have few people controlling it. And so you really drive, now you talk about efficiency. Now you drive this efficiency of this as much as possible. So the amount of R&D resources and dollars spent on that is as low as possible for the same output. And every dollar you save, now you reinvest into creative type of work that require experimentation, that require creativity, that require innovation. Because that process, to the majority of its work, you cannot digitalize. Creativity is still, to this point, very much a human function that we need people to do.
Fantastic. I have one last question for you each, and this just dawned on me, and it's probably a question I should ask most of my guests. It was You've obviously been through a huge evolution with this journey. You've probably trialed lots of different tools and tactics. You've landed on the hunter strategy as one to use for yourselves as a framework. And through doing the show, and for those people who are watching us, all the books behind me, there are tons and tons of strategy and tactics and different ways of doing this. But choosing one and then making it work for you is actually really, really important. But also then having the willingness to throw it out and try something new and evolve it and make your own types of frameworks. I think that's so, so important. But the question I have, Ellie, I'll come to you first, is going back to your earlier self when you started off on the innovation or the corporate explorer journey. What would be the one piece of advice that you'd give yourself if you had the time machine to go back to yourself and go, hey, Ellie, don't do this. Don't do this thing that you were about to do, because this will not pay out well for the future. I'd love you to share that, the piece of advice you'd give to an early version of Ellie in a corporate explorer sense.
There will be probably multiple things, but one of the things is
There's a book,
I would
there's a
be
book coming.
there's a book is coming. Yeah, we'll put a book on that. Be courageous, really. I think I self-doubted a lot at the beginning and put myself a little bit in a quiet seat and start observing some of the things, but be courageous to try and show evidence. I would say a lot of tools are available. People will talk, but two things that actually helped us with evolving to where we are is having top management who are good listeners, and they allow or they actually trust and empower. And then also courageous employees that are willing to try and bring evidence and lead up. So we met somewhere in the middle together. And right at the beginning, if I would say, I would have started much more with, but I also didn't know much back then. And it's like, is it true? Am I going to sound stupid? Yeah, but you will learn only if you just sound stupid and then observe and then come back and reflect and then go back again and correct yourself. So I would say out of a lot of other things, I would be just more courageous to try different things and then just come up with best practices and lesson learn as much as I can.
Brilliant advice. And Charles, what's your piece of advice for an earlier Charles?
How much time do we have?
That's a whole
Two
different,
books
that's a
coming
whole
out.
different series.
I will start with time is the only resource you don't control. Right. And because of this, there's maybe two things that come to mind when you ask this question. The one is I would start much earlier partnerships. We tend to be a little bit naive that we are the only smart people on the planet, and you don't wear the business card of the company, then the work we are doing with corporate venture capital and working with startup and try to leverage their tech and to combine it with yours. We started that quite late, and I wish we would have started earlier. We're still not that great at it, but we are really working to try to leverage it, because if you can access the tech that exists already IP'd and then you license it and then you build a adjacent product with it, your speed to market is phenomenal. So that's number one. The second is the shiny toy here, in a breakaway innovation, this new business model that everybody's talking about and very few people are able to do. When you do this, you keep your eyes off the core business, and the core business is so valuable. You have customer relationship, you know what you're doing. The problem is, what we talked earlier, you're consuming so much of your R&D on this incremental. So if you can have the discipline to really say, I'm really innovate on my core. This is in terms of, and now that will be the first time I talked about financial metrics, return on innovation has the best chance into that middle segment, right? We tend to go to the extreme. So focus on the one where the return is the best, because you have the capability, you have the brand name, you have the experience, you have the brain in your company. So don't try to go too far out. It's okay to put some bets on the future, but leverage who you are and then evolve that business with additional services, smartification, IoT, whatever it is, to make that core business even more valuable to you.
I just want to finish up by thanking our sponsor. So Wazoku, Charles mentioned partnership. Good way to partner is with the Wazoku crowd of 700,000 plus collective, intelligent people that are out there on the planet. And you can find out more about Wazoku at www.wazoku.com. And finally, thank you to our guests, Ellie Amirnasr and Charles Vaillant. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
My pleasure.